God has been faithful. So when Jacob challenges them, he just doesn't say, hey, I'm awesome, take my word for it. No, he calls to mind their common experience and says, this same God that's going to protect you in the future, in this new arena, is the same God that was faithful to us in the past. Don't you remember how awesome it was? These stories that we still tell of how our people passed through that sea, and then it closed down around the Egyptian army. That same God who's been faithful to us is going to be faithful into the future. And many of you have seen part of this reading, whether it's been in Christian bookstores or cards or letters before, where it says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So basically Joshua is saying to them, this God has been faithful. God has been with you in the past. He has saved your life. So many times He's given you wonderful people to walk with you through your life so that you know that you're not alone. You can trust Him. You can trust Him. You can put all your eggs in His basket. Have it your way. Awesome, Ian. Go for it. The theme for Burger King is have it your way. I think that's what Joshua is telling the people here. Have it your way. I remember I was on a trip into East Tennessee, and someone had told me about a mosque that was being built in Tennessee. And I remember some of the political things going on, and I was as much wrapped up in it as anything, because you don't usually put the word mosque and East Tennessee together. They usually don't go together. Now, the political background of this, which would probably be helpful to know, is supposedly it was near, and it probably is near, a big Baptist church, and it was almost like a yeah, we'll build a bigger one. Now, I wanted to hear something about this, so I asked my waiter at the Old Mill restaurant, what do you know about this? And I was so worked up about it. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this. And he said, I live here, and I've never even heard of that. I'm like, wow. Holy cow, I don't watch the news, and I've heard of it. And then he comes back to me, and he says, let me tell you something. I'm not preaching to you. I just want to tell you the way I respond. I don't care if 10 million Muslims move into this area of East Tennessee. My God allowed me to have a son. My son of old age, he said, like Abraham, when I wasn't supposed to have a child. And he was sickly. And God has been with me. And he's well now. That God has been faithful to me. And I don't care if 1 million Muslims move into this area. I'm going to be faithful to my God because He's always been faithful to me. And maybe they'll learn something about my God by the way I choose to live. And not be afraid. And not be afraid. That guy got a pretty big tip. God has been faithful. I'm sticking with Him. I can't go to anywhere else but God. It invites others in. And others say, wait a minute, let me hear some more about that. Let me hear about that God that you're going to stick with in spite of everything crashing down around you. Don't believe me? Look at the history of Israel. Stick with Him in spite of everything. Exile. Brutal beatings. Look at the story of Paul. We're sticking with you, Jesus, no matter. Donald Miller, in his book Blue Like Jazz, Contemporary Musings on the Christian Faith, or something like that. Blue Like Jazz. He says in there, I always hated jazz music because jazz music never resolves. It never ends. It never comes to a complete. It never resolves. I hated God for that same reason, he said. And then this happened. And he goes into the stories that he writes, or essays. If you want to read them, they're very short. You can put them down and be done. And then he tells about going to this jazz concert where he hated the music. And then he saw this man playing a saxophone. And it was a music he didn't appreciate, but he saw the love of that man being poured into that instrument. And he said, I wanted to know more. God, I hope that each of our faith lives are like that. That people see what God is doing in us, in spite of the circumstances, and say, I want to know more about this God. I want to know more about this. So that God looks at us and says, you know what? I love you no matter what. I'm not going to run from you. Here, I love you so much. Have it your way. But may we be able to turn back to God and say, have it your way. Amen.